There's plenty of speculation through the holidays and into the new year about what state government will focus on for the year. But things actually start to take shape with the governor's State of the State address. With that in the books now, we can start to examine how this legislature will actually affect the North Country. So we dig into Governor Kathy Hochul's State of the State address on today's Story of the Day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Long Run Wealth, an SEC-registered investment advisor in Lake Placid, providing comprehensive wealth management, retirement, and financial planning solutions. LongRunWealth.com. And the Devlin Inn and Suites, Lake Placid, welcoming families, athletes, and groups to the Olympic Village, offering Adirondack mountain views and dog-friendly accommodations. TheDevlinNY.com.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Wednesday, January 14th. We're going to dedicate the whole show to Hochul's fifth State of the State. Listen back to yesterday's show for the basics, her focus on affordability, her attacks against President Trump, etc. Let's start with statewide reaction. We have this story from our new New York Public News Network Albany correspondent, Samuel King.
Two of Governor Hochul's topics during her speech drew sustained standing ovations. One was her plan for child care.
And this plan will ultimately deliver universal child care for every single family in New York, full stop. Full stop. Now, the work has already begun.
The other came when she discussed ICE. Her State of the State proposals include legislation allowing New Yorkers to sue in state court if federal officers violate a person's constitutional rights.
Protecting New Yorkers also means this: standing up to ICE agents who abuse their power.
That illustrated a recurring theme during her speech in the Hart Theater at the Egg in Albany, fighting back against powers that be, a tendency she says dates back to the nation's founding 250 years ago.
It's that resilience, that strength, that spirit, that willingness to fight for a better future that was born in secret meetings in the taverns of Albany and New York City, charting a path forward under the weight of an oppressive power. Sound familiar?
The other theme, affordability, as Hochul outlined proposals to reduce utility bills, lower home and auto insurance costs, and create more affordable housing.
Parents, veterans, disabled, seniors, they all need relief.
Local officials like Mayor Mike Ferguson of Fredonia in Western New York made the trip to Albany for the speech. He welcomed Hochul's proposal to streamline the environmental review process for certain housing projects.
And that's going to save buyers thousands upon thousands of dollars, not to mention the amount of time it's going to cut in the buying process.
The speech comes as Hochul embarks on a re-election campaign, with a Republican challenger, Nassau County Executive Bruce Blakeman, on her right, and a challenger within her own party, Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado, running on her left. Former Lieutenant Governor Bob Duffy, who is now the president and CEO of the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce, said Hochul has a balancing act between those who say she is going too far with some proposals like child care and those who say she's retreating on some issues, like the environment.
And so a lot of things people may take issue with, but I think she's spot on. And here's the difficult thing. She's in an election year. She's trying to be pulled far, far left. The state is not far left. I think the state is mostly moderate.
Meanwhile, Republicans in the legislature, like Assembly Minority Leader Will Barclay of Oswego County, said they were largely skeptical of the governor's proposals and the focus on Washington.
It's hard for her probably to admit that Democrats have been one-party rule here in Albany for over a decade. So many of the big problems we have in New York, namely affordability, I think can be laid at the footsteps or the feet of the governor and her Democratic colleagues.
Now the work of turning her proposals into law begins. The governor will unveil her executive budget proposal next week. In Albany, I'm Samuel King for the New York Public News Network.
Since 2022, New York has poured $8 billion into the state's child care system. Governor Hochul promised another $1.7 billion this year in her State of the State address, where child care was a top agenda item. Amy Feiereisel reports on the governor's next steps on the path towards statewide universal child care.
Hochul's vision of free childcare for every family in New York won't be coming in 2026, but she did outline how she hopes to get there. In New York City, it looks like expanded care for 2-, 3-, and 4-year-olds. In the rest of the state, the governor is promising a slot for every 4-year-old in New York's pre-K program by 2028. She intends to do that by funding pre-K slots at a uniform and higher level. More immediately, she committed an almost 50% increase in the funding for the state child care subsidy program, which will pay for more families' childcare. Bruce Stewart, director of the St. Lawrence Child Care Council, is cautiously optimistic about how that additional money will actually play out.
The increase in the funding allocations is always welcome news. It's just in the details of how it will all work. Does it truly provide enough funding to meet the needs within the rural communities that we have here in the North Country? I hope it does.
For example, due to expanded eligibility for the state's child care subsidies, which was pushed by Hochul, demand for those subsidies has far outstripped funding in over half the state's counties, including most in northern New York. North Country communities could also be the site of pilot programs that would provide child care to all families in a certain area, without any income limits or means testing. The funding details will come later when Hochul releases her executive budget later this month. Amy Feiereisel, North Country Public Radio.
Another big focus of the speech, and the biggest applause line, was about immigration enforcement. The governor pushed back against what she called overreach by the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. She proposed new rules for ICE agents operating in New York. David Escobar has the details.
The governor received 2 big standing ovations during her address. One came after she demanded accountability for what she described as an unprecedented escalation in federal immigration enforcement. She mentioned the ICE agent who shot and killed a woman in Minneapolis earlier this month.
Protecting New Yorkers also means this: standing up to ICE agents who abuse their power.
Hochul said communities across the state have been shaken by federal immigration actions that she says have gone too far. She pointed to an ICE raid at a dairy farm outside Sackett's Harbor last March, where 7 people, including 3 children, were detained, sparking a huge local backlash. As part of a slate of new proposals, Hochul says she's backing legislation that would allow New Yorkers to sue federal agents in state civil court for violations of their constitutional rights. She says the bill would ensure immigration officials act within the scope of their authority.
And when these boundaries are crossed, accountability matters. No one, from the president on down, is above the law. Let me repeat, no one.
Another proposal would require federal immigration officials to carry a judicial warrant when conducting enforcement actions in so-called sensitive locations, including houses of worship, schools, and hospitals. David Escobar, North Country Public Radio.
There wasn't much environmental or climate change policy in Governor Hochul's speech, but one thing was a doubling down on nuclear energy. Last year, Hochul announced the state's intent to build a new nuclear power plant in upstate New York that would generate at least 1 gigawatt of power. But in yesterday's address, she said 1 gigawatt won't be enough to meet the state's need for zero carbon energy to combat climate change.
There's one thing I believe: you go big or you go home. So I've decided to raise the bar to 5 gigawatts. That's more nuclear power than is built anywhere in the United States in the last 30 years. Let's do it.
Nuclear power currently produces 3.4 gigawatts of energy in New York, about a fifth of its electricity. The New York Power Authority recently announced a list of communities that have said they're willing to host nuclear power plants, and those include Jefferson and St. Lawrence counties. An environment-adjacent issue was a new initiative aimed at making New York State's lands more accessible to people with disabilities. It's called These Lands Are for Everyone. The program will invest in outdoor experiences designed to be more inclusive, especially for children and people with mobility or sensory disabilities. Planned projects include tactile displays in the Adirondacks, sensory trails in the Catskills, and a new education center at a nature preserve near Buffalo. These are all just policy sketches, really. The rubber actually hits the road next week when Hochul releases her executive budget. We'll, of course, be following all these issues on Story of the Day, on our morning show, Northern Light, and online at ncpr.org. Music today by Christopher Watts of Canton and Evan Veenstra of Gananoque, Ontario. I'm David Sommerstein, North Country Public Radio.